the screen? I'm never sure if it's I'm never sure how much the glare needs to be fixed. Okay. Do you need me? Oh, I guess I need to be on the mic so that the folks on the recording are tuned in. I'm Lauren DesRosiers again. So I have a bit of a critique today. And if I say doc go, raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. Okay. If you have a sense of what is happening with immigrants in New York City and throughout New York State and the shelter issues that they are currently facing, raise your hand. Okay. So about the same group. Great. I wanted to see where my knowledge levels were so that I could get a better sense of where I need to really go in and where there might be some existing knowledge. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about what that system looks like, what the problems are, and why we need to fix it seriously, quickly, and now. I'm going to try to do this fairly quickly. I can go on for about 2 hours easily, but in the interest of not boring you or talking too much about Foucault, we're going to kind of move that a lot quicker. But I'm aiming to do 3 things. The first is going to review the shelter structure in New York City. I'm doing that because the New York City structure is affecting the rest of upstate and other areas and in adjacent states. After that, I'm going to talk a little bit about states of emergency and how states of emergency are affecting the way that this is playing out, not just in New York State, but all the way in Texas, in across the border, and how those states of emergency play into the way that the entire immigration system, or should I say, immigrant shelter system, is regulated. And then third, I'm going to talk about why that is dangerous and what we need to do to fix it. So if you've heard any of the talk recently about Eric Adams or any of his deputy mayors or any of the folks who are working on the immigration shelter issue in New York City right now, it's often termed as an unprecedented emergency, a crisis of proportions that you've never dreamed of. So this quote says, "New York City pleads for the court's understanding of the seemingly insurmountable shortage of housing to meet the problem, the crisis, and the emergencies. They note that the supply and the incontrollable influx of families and the unmatched demand are the dominating societal forces driving the homeless problem." That is from 1994. It is literally, I had pulled this quote from a different right to shelter litigation, and I had not properly amended the site, and it had kind of gone up into the paragraph of the quote, and I thought that this was something that one of the New York City delegates had been talking about. So this is a longstanding issue, and the more that we can pull ourselves out of this emergency reaction by remembering that these are longstanding issues that require appropriate regulation and adequate, sustainable development, regulation, and funding, the better off we're going to be. This was 20 years ago? No, 30 years ago. The same thing was said 40 years ago in the previous 10 minutes of litigation. We have our MC with us today. Do you want to introduce yourself and come up?
Sure. Want me to come up? Yes, fine.
Yeah, I mean.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Beroro. Any one of you was in the halls earlier. I am current legislator in Albany here. This is Albany, for those of you that are outside of the state, outside of the city. County Legislator represents just down the block, Pine Hills neighborhood. And this is my second term. And also I'm a member of the Board of Advisors for the Rockefeller Institute of Immigrant Integration, Policy and Research.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad you made it over here. No, you're good. Okay, so New York City has a right to shelter. It comes from a 1981 consent decree in Callahan v. Carey. This is the case that predated the quote on the previous page. Oh, what is happening? Okay, I'm not used to all this fancy equipment. So anybody who goes to New York City and needs immediate, what is happening? Okay. What's happening? Okay. There we go. So right to shelter, it means that anybody who needs shelter, who needs temporary emergency shelter, can go to an intake center in New York City and be given emergency shelter immediately. There are eligibility assessments that happen after that initial intake. But the idea is that anybody who needs housing, at least initially, is entitled to some sort of temporary shelter. What has happened over the past year and 2 years, really, is that there are now two shelter systems. There's the normal Department of Homeless Services, Department of Social Services shelter system, and then there is another shelter system, and that is the shelter system for immigrants. I'm going to say it's not for immigrants, it's for people who are perceived to be immigrants, because as we'll talk about a little bit later, the actual assessment for immigration status didn't actually happen until September of this past year, of September of 2023. So a lot of the assessments of if you are an immigrant and what your immigration status was based on race, language, country of origin. And that has all sorts of legal implications. But we're gonna stick on this before going off into another tangent. This secondary system is privatized. It's run mostly through New York City Health and Hospitals, which is the New York City public hospital system. And people are limited to a 30-day stay. If they're families with children, they're now under a stipulation allowed a 60-day stay. If you can show exceptional circumstances, you can stay past those initial 30 or 60 days. The New York City Comptroller Brad Lander came out with a report recently. There was a previous 60-day rule that got finalized into a stipulation on March 15th that found that the segregated shelter system for the 60-day limits were implemented in a haphazard manner without adequate policies or training in place, including no written policies. There were no written policies for how this was going to play out. Since the magnitude of this is large, but it's not astronomical. So since 2022, I think that there have been over 190,000. I might be, 10,000, few 10,000 off, but around there, 200,000 people needing shelter in New York City. It is a lot of people. I will also say I went to the University of Michigan, and if you go to the University of Michigan, if you know anything about college football, the Big House is one of the biggest college football stadiums in the entire world. I think it's something like 117,000 people can fit in that. So it's not that much people compared to if you imagine that 117,000 people can file in and out of little tiny Ann Arbor, Michigan after tailgating and going to a football game. And that all happens pretty quickly and smoothly. It starts to put this number into a bit more context. So I want to kind of walk through what this looks like. Alex is a person from, let's say, Senegal. Primary language is French, but also speaks Wolof. Has been, we'll talk about what the possibilities for immigration status are, but if Alex goes to a DHS intake shelter, he will probably be told that he is an asylum seeker and has to go to a different intake shelter at the Roosevelt Hotel. He can't have intake at the DHS shelter. So he then goes to the Roosevelt Hotel. He is put through a separate intake process. After that intake, he's placed in a HERC, which is a humanitarian emergency something center that's run by Health and Hospitals for 30 days. He spends the next 30 days trying to get a job. He can't actually get a job. He can't prove any of the exceptional circumstances under the Callahan stipulation, which is the 30-day max stay. And so he's evicted from the HERC and has nowhere to stay. He doesn't get a chance to reapply. He doesn't have any other opportunities. One thing to keep in mind here is that there is no reason that Alex should be in this system other than the assumption that he is an immigrant and an asylum seeker. He might have permanent status. He might have all sorts of other, he could be a citizen, but there are assumptions that are baked into who he is that depend on where he ends up. And because there is no immigration assessment, and the ones that are happening now are, if they're happening at all, they're really, really minimal and not done by anybody who's well trained. They are not, they're not going to capture the separation of who's actually an immigrant. If you're, I don't think that anybody should be in this, but if you're an immigrant or if you are eligible for other shelter. Okay, states of emergency. I'm hitting something and I don't know what it is. Okay, so Eric Adams last year, August 9th, 100,000 asylum seekers. Thank you. The max number of people who were processed through Ellis Island, 11,747 on one day, right? So I again want to bring to our attention how much this is a matter of perspective. Oh, this did not line up the way that it did on my computer. This, I'm not going to read through everything, but it is an overview of the number of states of emergency that are currently governing immigration and immigrants. So beginning with the invocation of Title 42 as a bar to entry for immigrants at the southwest or southern border. Ever since then, almost all of immigration and immigrants have been regulated by executive order. So Title 42 changed the way that the US processes immigrants at the southern border instead of under Title 8, which is the Immigration and Nationality Act, the immigration statute. It gets processed under Title 42, which is the public health emergency statute. Then Texas Governor Abbott declared a disaster due to the number of people who were coming to Texas. He now calls it an invasion. declared a disaster, which increased the penalties that attached to a lot of the criminal prosecutions because of that disaster. The next year, Eric Adams also declared an emergency based on the anticipation that there were going to be more people coming and more people in New York needing shelter. After that, Hochul declared a disaster emergency based on the anticipated surge of migration into the United States. That has continued, and I won't go too far into the county or specifics of any of these, but if you are trapped in the immigration system, you're going to get trapped in one of these. So what does a state of emergency do, right? It creates a shortcut, right? We have these emergencies, we need to get things done. And one of the things that's really scary about, that's common to all of these, is that the crisis, the emergency, is the mere presence of somebody, right? It is not, there is a tornado. It's not, there is a hurricane, right? It is, this person is here. And that is fundamentally something that is worrisome, because the way to get out of that state of emergency is to make that person not there, right? There are also all sorts of other contexts around how that is really just a legal fiction that can be changed. But in order to do that, we would have to actually have a working legislature, which we don't currently have. And I just want to draw your attention to the similarities between the verbiage that Abbott uses, the ongoing surge of individuals, and then the same similar language that gets used, the arrival of increased numbers of migrants, right? It is very evocative and very similar between the language that Texas uses and the language that New York uses. So when we declare a disaster, it does a few things. It makes things a lot easier, and it lets the executive act unilaterally. So when you declare a disaster or declare a state of emergency, the first thing that usually gets freed up is funding, right? So you either get to pull from other pots of money, emergency funds, you also get to expedite contracting. So instead of going through a whole boring, long bid process with lots of different competitors, trying to, get to the lowest number and assessing their, assessing their competency, it lets you cherry pick who you want. And there are legitimate reasons to have that happen. And also it's something that can be used very, it can be used and abused. It also allows the suspension of laws. And that's something that we always want to be careful of. For instance, in New York, there is a suspension of the housing law, which now people who are being housed in certain areas cannot create a landlord-tenant relationship, so they don't have any housing rights, right? And here we go. I didn't do that, but my PowerPoint is helping me along. So when I mentioned DocGo earlier, DocGo is one of the primary vendors that is that has been contracted to support people in upstate New York. This is something that one of the DocGo case managers texted to me last summer. This is literally just warehousing vulnerable people for cash. There's a long history of crisis capitalism and profiteering. We don't see it in New York as much. We aren't in Puerto Rico. We aren't in, the Virgin Islands, where some of this crisis capitalism is like really, really visible. We're seeing it here, right? This is the creation of the creation of a situation where people are very, very vulnerable. They have very little rights. They have no connections or few connections to the United States, and people are making a lot of money off of them. This is from a letter that Comptroller Lander sent to rejecting the DACO contract. The CEO seems eager to capitalize on the fact that the longer asylum seekers remain in their care, the more the company's revenue will continue to grow. Now, this is what happens when you have emergency procurement. So there's been, I think, about $7 billion in contracts promised for all of New York City. Health and Hospitals awarded $3.5 billion unilaterally during that same period. The Health and Hospitals president and CEO, on his own between board meetings without any oversight, authorized over $2.9 billion, which is an astronomical number. It's astronomical, especially when you compare it with the fact that upstate organizations or the New York City organizations that are doing a lot of the work have gotten little to no money. So state of exception, and then I know I'm a little bit over time, but I'll hurry up. So a state of exception is that suspension of law. And I won't get too far into the theory, but when there is a suspension of law, when rights and the protection of law don't apply to people, that often comes with the state of emergency, and that's when things get really scary. Because what we have is we have a state of emergency, so necessity, right? We need to act quickly. We have to do everything possible. We don't have time to think about it. We have a lot of the governing authority consolidated into the executive, so you don't get the checks that a legislature or a comptroller or other outside oversight entities would usually give. And then you have suspension of law, right? So you have suspension of rights, and that ties into the necessity, but it's very easy to start violating people's rights. These are some of the quotes on the theory that I won't get into. What we have in New York City shelter is getting pretty scary because there is no oversight and there are no regulations. So the state agency, the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, has specifically said that they do not have oversight authority over these non-DSS, non-DHS shelters. I think that this is a severe misreading of the New York State Constitution and the social services law. It nevertheless is what the agency is claiming and what they are doing. And they have asserted that on a number of occasions. That means that none of these shelter sites have to comply with standard basic New York State regulations. And it means that there is no authority that is going to oversee their treatment of people. So this is kind of what the structure does. And this leads to, this leads to bad rights. So I just want to go over these before you kick me out because these are shocking. This is a threat that was posted on one of the hotels up here that people were removed to, many of whom did not have any idea that they were leaving New York City or had been lied to about why they should leave New York City. This says that if they violate any of the rules of the program, they will lose the opportunity to seek asylum. This is a fake work document that people were given, saying that they're eligible for employment as a 1099 contractor. If you get one of these with a New York City logo on it, and you aren't from the United States, why would you think that this is not valid? And so what we need to do is we need to get some oversight over this. And that's my number one policy suggestion is this absolutely has to have oversight. The other thing that needs to happen is the people who are actually doing the work need to get the funding, particularly legal immigration legal services. Okay. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Sweet. Hey, oh gosh, I'm so short. This is always a problem. Okay, so I'm going to just scoot over here. Thank you so much, Lauren. We're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some programs that have been started over the last 2 years to really expand resettlement capacity and opportunities for immigration to the United States through community sponsorship, which offers kind of new complementary pathways to the U.S. refugee admissions traditional program reception and placement. So I'm going to get started. Again, my name is Aubrey Grant, and I am a founding member of the Community Sponsorship Hub and the Program Manager of Practice and Research. And I'm joined by Neela, who is the Associate Director for Welcome Corps on campus. Before I dive too deep in, there has been a lot happening over the last 2 years. If you've been following kind of the immigration pathways in the United States, different programs that have emerged as an emergency response, but through resettlement of individuals, before they arrive. So relocation from their first country of origin, their country of origin, or from a safe second or third country. And so what we have here are kind of 2 separate programs I just want to highlight because it's going to have some implications in terms of what we talk about today. So on one side, we have Department of State programs. These are programs that are overseen by the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. These are your traditional historical kind of refugee resettlement programs that have been expanded. So on one side, and I'll get into it a little bit, we have community sponsorship. And then how many of you have heard about Uniting for Ukraine or processes for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans? Okay, perfect. So on the other side of the house, we have Department of Homeland Security's Custom and Immigration Services who have expanded additional pathways of individual sponsorship to support humanitarian parolees coming into the United States. And today we're going to talk about programs that have been set up to support individuals sponsoring through these different pathways. So what is community sponsorship? You don't need to read this whole slide. I'll make it really easy. Community sponsorship is when a group of individuals come together and they are paired with a refugee or humanitarian parolee who's immigrating into the United States. And that group of sponsors is going to provide volunteer services that help them as they resettle into their new community, and then fundraise or collect donated items to help kind of set up and support the newcomers, as we call them at the Community Sponsorship Hub, as they kind of rebuild their lives in their new community. This is different than the individual sponsorship where one individual takes it on and just helps them relocate to the United States. So why is community sponsorship important? Well, we think this is a way in which individuals coming together brings their communities involved in the act of welcoming, but it also brings social capitals to newcomers and provides them with opportunities that kind of allows them to have a group or, have a group of individuals supporting them, but also helping them as they navigate their new communities and understanding kind of key aspects of that. And it also helps them get linked and using that social capital to needed resources. So there are 2 broad categories of community sponsorship. I don't want to go down too deep in this, but just so that you understand, there are some that are traditional. We heard today about Catholic Charities. I know USCRI Albany is here. These are resettlement agencies that exist that take on the primary responsibility and sponsorship of a refugee case, and then they might partner with groups of volunteers to help them as they resettle. Over the last 2 years, we've seen a huge increase in programs that allow communities like the ones here to be the direct welcomers themselves. So come together and take on the direct responsibility of welcoming and kind of expand capacity, but also use your expertise and knowledge to help individuals as they kind of integrate and as they kind of navigate the local community. So we have the Sponsor Circle program, which was set up, and I'm going to talk a little bit about later today, but to help individuals initially coming in through Operation Allies Welcome, and has now been expanded to support individuals who are coming in through humanitarian pathways. Then we have Welcome Corps on Campus, which is a program that Neela is going to talk a little bit about that is set up to help refugee students who are accepted into a university program as they arrive and get their higher education degree, but also kind of integrate into their local community. And I keep using integrate because I know that's the theme of today is integration. And then finally, you have Welcome Corps, and this is a pathway for any refugee who's eligible for resettlement through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program to do so. So I'm going to hand it over to Neela, who's taller than me, so she can probably stand up back here.
15 minutes-ish. I always say that I'm going to keep it short, and then I guess I don't. Okay, so my name is Nele Feldman. I'm the Associate Director for Welcome Corps on Campus at the Community Sponsorship Hub. And as Aubrey said, I feel like we're shifting gears a little bit from the first presentation. And there are so many things I heard throughout the day that really resonated. I will say that I felt really set up for this presentation during the president's welcome remarks, just really honing in on the role that higher education institutions play in our communities, that they play for, our domestic students, but also international students, immigrant and refugee students. So Welcome Corps on Campus was really designed specifically to serve refugee students through the United States Refugee Admissions Program. And I say that because Welcome Corps on Campus is not serving refugees already in your communities. However, at the end of the presentation, I will get to that. I think, as Aubrey mentioned, by creating these types of programs, we want to build capacity for refugees, but we really also want to build a broader capacity for welcoming in our communities that is not only for refugees or asylum seekers or asylees or immigrants, but really taking sort of a holistic look at, best practices, lessons learned in welcoming, as we say at the Community Sponsorship Hub, newcomers in our communities. So let's go. Aubrey is going to talk about Welcome Corps. I always have to mention the Welcome Corps when I talk about Welcome Corps on Campus, the reason being that really these two programs, they fall under the same umbrella. So the Welcome Corps was launched in January 2023. Exactly, like time since COVID, right? And it really, as Aubrey mentioned, it is this new opportunity for Americans across the country. I will talk about New York State a little bit, but Welcome Corps and Welcome Corps on Campus, they're national programs, but then again, they really take place in our local communities. And it really allows for the first time, well, maybe I think, Ray, you would disagree, not for the first time, but it does allow Americans to directly engage in refugee resettlement through what we call private sponsorship. Just again, remember sort of the hierarchy that Aubrey just showed, where it's like the community-led sponsorship of refugees. I mean, it's not me who said that, but many do say that it was the boldest innovation in refugee resettlement in 4 decades. And as Aubrey mentioned, the concept is that a group of 5 or more pulls together, applies to sponsor a refugee, and then welcomes them in their local communities. So what that means for Welcome Corps on Campus, we kind of call us an expansion of the Welcome Corps. We are an independent program, but again, that concept of the group of 5 very much applies to the Welcome Corps on Campus program as well. It really is, I would say, the one key design component that we do see in private sponsorship. And what we felt really strongly that universities across the United States, including in New York, are so well set up to provide resettlement services and welcome services to refugees broadly and refugee students specifically, and that they can really hone in on that capacity to not only provide academic opportunity, which of course is wonderful and great, but at the same time also serve as resettlement spaces and offering a much broader, much more holistic integration and support network to the students they're welcoming. We have to always say this is a public-private partnership. So as Aubrey mentioned, it's a program that was launched by the US Department of State, the Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration, and then Welcome Corps on campus is implemented by a consortium of organizations. It's led by the Community Sponsorship Hub. And the organizations that we did bring together, you can see them at the bottom. It's a big group of us, but it's really sort of that combined experience between resettlement and higher education. So I always like to call it sort of that ideally, and there's lots of lessons learned, really that perfect intersection between the higher education, world and then resettlement. So what is really new for refugee students? I think if I would, I don't know if Ray has any knowledge, how many refugee students, how many asylum seekers, asylees already study at SUNY? Most likely there's a really higher number. And I know that again, like talking to, I'm not a researcher, but that is like some data that we've all been looking for quite some time. And it's not that easy to figure out. However, what we do know in the past, many refugee students come on F1 student visas if they're lucky enough to actually get these visas. When they do come on an F1 visa, it's a non-immigrant visa. So again, I'm not going to go into details. It's very challenging in the first place to get that visa. Once you're here, you're on a non-immigrant status, which basically implies that at some point you're going to go home. But that might be really difficult if you come from a place where there's war, displacement, if anyway you already came from a country that is not your home country. So really, Welcome Corps on campus for the first time, and that I'm sure about, for the very first time in US history, offers that opportunity for refugees to come to the United States for sort of both the purpose of getting a higher education degree and at the same time resettlement. And one of the really crucial differences for students especially is that it puts them on a pathway to permanent residency and ultimately to citizenship. So of course, that's a huge game changer for refugee students coming here. But at the same time, I also want to point out that again, there is hundreds of students, maybe thousands, I really don't know, of refugee students who come on F1 visas, and they do receive scholarships. And universities across the country are doing a fabulous job in really supporting them. However, I think we at the Community Sponsorship Hub, with these programs we're building, we always say, we're building the plane as we fly it. And I think the same is true for universities. You talked a lot about emergency response. We've seen universities responding to the Syria crisis, then Ukraine, then, see, you're right. I really honestly did not even touch anything. Wow. Wow. Okay. That's impressive. And maybe there's I don't know. Anyway, and we have seen that universities really more and more, especially since the Syria crisis, understand the role they can play to support refugee students specifically. But then again, there's no broader system or infrastructure that would support them to welcome refugee students in a more sustainable and holistic way. And they have so many lessons learned since Syria, but we want to get out of that constant emergency response, right? Whenever there's a crisis, then we're going to offer a scholarship for those, for students from that country. And I do think that especially since Syria, we have acknowledged there's many, many more students and young people around the world who have been in more protracted crises for decades, who are also looking for education opportunity, who are also looking for a way to build their own sustainable lives. And most likely, in many scenarios, they're not able to do that in their current host country. I'm saying this because I do think that when we bring students over, regardless if it's on, as officially resettled refugees, humanitarian parole, if they stay here on TPS, or if they come on an F1 visa, there needs to be a broader integration and support network. So for the Welcome Core on campus, I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it was really part of the whole design considerations that, again, this consortium of organizations, that we want to make sure that when groups say, yes, I want to step forward, I want to sponsor refugee, that there's also training involved, that there's ongoing training and support, that there is monitoring, right? So that sponsor groups cannot just do whatever they might want to do, but there's actually a system in place that ensures that sponsors understand the responsibilities, that students understand what they're entitled to, and at the same time, we provide the service and we provide the support to allow sponsors to fulfill their roles. So that's new for campuses. I basically talked about this slide. So we want to see more and more institutions in New York State and across the country to step forward and say, we want to participate in the Welcome Core on campus. We want to participate in building a sustainable infrastructure that helps us resettle refugee students to our campus communities. And I think one of the components that we have seen for many institutions, it's definitely about the opportunity for the student, but it really is this opportunity for the campus to pull together, to bring in multiple departments and to work really for a common cause that builds and strengthens your own campus communities. I'm not going to go too much into detail on this slide. So the campus sponsor group, and I know this can be like a little just new, I guess, they're the official sponsors. Students come, of course, to an institution, but it's, of course, individuals who provide services. It's the individual who is the point of contact for the refugee. So it's also this group of 5 that is committing to provide what we call core sponsorship services. It is resettlement, so the requirement is 12 months. I understand that a degree usually is 4 years, but again, we're talking about an official resettlement program. And for RNP, we're looking at 90 days. So having been able to extend this to a full year, I would say has actually been quite an accomplishment on our side. And I would also argue that all of the institutions who have signed up, they know that, they know much better than we do that a student is going to come for 4 years. They have a really high interest in retention and ensuring that students are successful. So when they engage, they do plan for 4 years, even if we can only ask them for 12 months. So this is typically what a group is made out of: staff, faculty, students, alumni, but also local community members. There's no sort of like strict requirement. Everyone has to live in the same community because, again, individuals have to actually deliver services to the students who are coming. These are the core sponsorship services. I don't want to sort of bore you by going over them. I'm not actually sure if the slide, if the PowerPoints are going to be shared later, but I think it's relatively straightforward in understanding why these are the services. I will say that for the Welcome Core on campus, of course, it does include sort of the academic integration support, helping students understand the higher education system in the United States, which is really different to, I think, any other education system, to be honest. And I studied in Germany, and I still feel sometimes not entirely sure on where we stand here. And it also, of course, has a high focus on English language learning, and, really supporting students in finding their way on campus. So I mentioned that the group is the sponsor, but we also acknowledge that, of course, this is happening at university campuses. It's happening at institutions. And I think ideally, when I'm dreaming, this is always like this very mutual beneficial relationship between institutional leadership and administration and the group, where the institution can really empower the group to deliver, sort of the best experience to the refugee. We do ask groups to give us an institutional commitment letter because, again, we don't want this program to happen and then leadership is not on board, because leadership, they're really the ones opening the doors to admissions, advancement, housing. And I think especially admissions, we have seen from our experience, it's so important to have admissions on board. And we want the campus to be we want all of the different departments to be on the same page. Funding, of course, is one of the big topics where institutional leadership is coming in, or leading fundraising efforts. As I mentioned before, once a group is welcoming, there's ongoing support for the full 12 months. So it's not that, you know, a student arrives, the group is sort of like on their own devices and there's like no more support. There's ongoing support through community of practice, office hours, we have resources and materials, and we continue to build more resources and more materials as we learn. And then again, we also want to make sure that everyone understands this is a situation that it's monitored, right? So we do have an organization that is monitoring the private sponsor groups. It's providing support, but it's also monitoring to again ensure that there is no fraud, that there is no concerns on the student sides, and that the students are really receiving the services that they're entitled to and that they're quote unquote expecting coming to the United States under this program. And I will say, I didn't say this, our students come by themselves. They're between 18 to 24. So again, it is really, really important that the groups are taking this seriously and that they are the guides and the mentors and the friends. So this is the first, it's a very new program. Our first cohort is arriving this fall. July, August, we have 17 participating campuses. And if you're wherever you are, you know, we want to see many more campuses for next year. We would like to see 50 campuses. We always like to say there's approximately 4,000 institutions. I don't think every institution can participate, but let's say half is taking one student. We would be able to support 2,000 students per year. Right now, we have those 17 campuses in 11 states plus Washington, D.C. New York and Virginia both have 3 institutions participating, and we will support 31 students total for this very first cohort. My friend Aubrey here did a survey with our sponsor groups, our baseline survey, and I just wanted to share like some initial key findings. We don't have a ton of research just because it is such a new program. So just about the motivations, I don't know if I was surprised or not, but really sort of what we like to say, it's getting away from the emergency response to a more holistic, more developed and thought through approach. And that seemed to really resonate with our private sponsor groups, right? Where many of them have engaged with refugees before. And I think acknowledged that the Welcome Core on campus, though very new, is sort of this opportunity to build a more sustainable pathway to support refugee students on campuses. I think anyone who's from a campus won't be surprised to see that also for many institutions, this is really aligned with their institutional mission and values. And that, of course, diversifying and enriching local classrooms does play a crucial role in the motivations for participation. You can see all of the other reasons there. I'm not going to go through all of them. Also, for this very first cohort, I personally wasn't super surprised to see that most of our group members had in some shape or form already engaged with immigrants or refugee populations. So 80% versus 20% who had not previously engaged. And I think that is especially because it is a very new program. So of course, it's very helpful if you already have a certain understanding. I will not go over the slide, but I think that for the purpose of this conference, so the question was really how often, how frequently do you coordinate with other departments on campus? And I think why I love this, it's kind of this, you know, when we say it takes a village, and it does take a village on campus as well. And it really does take a village, not only from the academic point of view, which I think is very clear, but it's really also coordinating with anything that an individual needs, right? From housing to dining, to transportation, to clothing, to books, and so on and so forth. But a campus is sort of this small city, the small ecosystem, the small community in a broader community. There's such a wealth of resources on a campus that any individual really needs, and especially students do. And then campuses exist in that broader community, that broader infrastructure. So again, we really do believe in that concept of institutions being a fabulous place to welcome refugees, and specifically refugee students. I know I'm out of time. So I just wanted to share some of the quotes that the sponsor shared with us. And one is about success. And again, I do think, right, it's of course, retention. I did leave out the very obvious ones, retention and students graduating, but we had many comments on really helping and supporting students in becoming self-sufficient and finding employment, building a life, being a meaningful part of their community. So there were so many comments that were really targeted at the broader and sustainable and long-term integration, and how this group of 5 can play such a critical part in achieving that, and how the campus broadly can really, support the group in achieving that. What success would look like for the campuses and the institutions. Again, I hope the slides will be shared, but it's really also, I think there was like this acknowledgement on the campuses side that they can be the ones who capacitate the student to be successful. This is one sort of the most rewarding aspect. And I think the reason why I pulled this one out and I highlighted is like, how can we improve supports to other students with displaced learning backgrounds? And again, I think that's why a conference like here, yes, I'm talking about Welcome Core on campus, but this is really about building the capacity, a broader capacity, right? So a program such as Welcome Core on campus can benefit other immigrant and displaced populations, as well as the students who are coming in through these programs, right? A university is building their overall capacity from admissions to housing to dining. They're not only doing this, maybe the incentive was Welcome Core on campus, but at the end of the day, there is the opportunity to have that benefit other student populations as well. And with that, I'm going to leave with that quote to read, and I'm going to give it over to my colleague, Aubrey.
Okay, thank you. So I'm back to talk a little bit. So this is a new program, but like I mentioned before, there are existing programs that we've had that have built on experiences of community sponsors. And want to talk a little bit, because this is an integration kind of conference, a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of experiences, outcomes, but integrations of refugees in their local communities and the sponsor groups that help them. And the easiest way for me to start this conversation is by one of the more of the longstanding of the community-led programs in recent history. So in recent history, kind of in the modern times, is the Sponsor Circle program. We launched this in October 2021 to support Afghans resettling through Operation Allies Welcome. And although not required, we still have expanded it. We've expanded it to support Ukrainians, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans coming in through USCIS sponsorship program. So individuals who want to take a group approach can do so through the Sponsor Circle program. Again, this is essentially what Welcome Core on campus, and now most recently iteration of labor sponsorship through Welcome Core at Work was built on were the experiences of the Sponsor Circle program. The groups of 5 came together. We've had over 6,000 Americans sponsor through the program, and many more, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, who've supported them. And we, through the program, have supported around about 1,000 newcomers. There are different markers of integration as we think about it as a two-way process that's not linear, but that has different kind of outcomes across economic, social, cultural, and political aspects. Some of the easiest early indicators or markers for kind of progress on that kind of that progress towards integration, I guess is the best way to say it, or housing, employment, healthcare, and English language learning. These are things that the U.S. government tracks with existing programs as they identify individual self-sufficiency, but something that political scientists and sociologists and other academics study in terms of how they impact this longer term integration process. So I have here 2 examples. So the Sponsor Circle program for Afghans was a 90-day sponsorship commitment, a minimum of 90 days. We saw people continue to support outside of that, but it was a minimal commitment of 90 days. We have reports that at 90 days, these are kind of these early marker of outcomes. So 91% of newcomers supported through through Sponsor Circle program for Afghans had secured safe, secure and permanent housing. Really weird wording, I realize that, but this is kind of State Department wording that you track. I have a comparison here. So the Sponsor Circle program was just one way that Afghans were supported in their kind of resettlement into the United States. There was also the Reception and Placement program in which resettlement agencies supported them. And you'll see here I have a comparison. To some extent, they're not apples and oranges, so I want to be very clear about that. But if we can just take one look or one snapshot of experiences with the Sponsor Circle program, and then more generally through the U.S. initiative to resettle those populations, we see that the Office of Refugee Resettlement Survey found a similar outcome of 91% of Afghans. What's really interesting here is when we went a little bit deeper into why, we saw this 91% versus 100%. One of the wonderful aspects of community sponsorship was many of that other 9% were accessing temporary free housing that had been donated to them as a part of their Sponsor Circle program, kind of sponsor group. So, again, that number at first look is like, wow, 91%, not 100%. But it's because many more were in temporary housing that was free until they were able to get a job and save up some money and then find a permanent kind of apartment or housing. At the same time, we saw in the Sponsor Circle program, 81% of newcomers had secured employment. Within the broader public, 76% of households that had at least one adult working. What's interesting here, and this will come up as I talk a little bit about what we're seeing in Welcome Corps too, there were delays in the employment authorization documents. We had over 70,000 Afghans supported in their local kind of resettlement within 6 months. And so that puts a huge kind of strain on the government to process those documents. We also saw in the Sponsor Circle program, 80% of Afghans had completed an initial health screening or a primary care appointment. I don't have information on the broader Afghan public. And then English language learning, we saw 98% of newcomers had enrolled in English classes through the Sponsor Circle program and 76 more generally. Again, these are all markers because these are kind of steps towards being able to kind of build your network and your community, but also to give you the supports you need to kind of navigate your new community. We have, as I mentioned, expanded the Sponsor Circle program to support Ukrainians. This is a 6-month commitment. We extended it to because these are individuals coming in through humanitarian pathways. I have some data here on the outcomes. Again, across the board, we see pretty significant numbers. I will say again, we saw delays in that initial health screening, just finding that culturally appropriate care in some locations. Also, just getting a doctor's appointment takes some time. And then again, we saw the same delays in EAD cards and the kind of free or donated housing. So we wanted to take a deeper dive and understand better the experiences, the networks of the sponsors, the refugees, or the humanitarian parolees support through this. So we sent a survey out to Afghans at 180 days. Again, the minimum kind of commitment for sponsors was 90 days. So this is 3 months after that commitment ended. And the surveys were conducted in English, Dari, and Pashto, so they could select. And we asked a series of questions getting at kind of these short-term integration outcomes outside of these little tiny markers of self-sufficiency. And we also sent it out to the sponsors that welcomed them. And what we found across the board was this huge groundswell of support from local communities who had not previously engaged in resettlement, which is really interesting. And kind of you start to see kind of this whole of community approach coming really excited because of what this has implications down the road as we continue to see more welcoming communities. I know as we talk about policies that impact immigrants, not just refugees, these are individuals who are in the field and seeing the impact of policies, not just for refugees, not just for humanitarian parolees, but across the board, and also linking different resettlement actors to different resources that expands kind of not only the social capital and well-being of the refugees, but the community as a whole. We saw the average number of volunteers supporting that minimum group of 5 at 28, and we saw the average sponsor circle or sponsor group size being 8 individuals, and the average newcomer house size being 4. So we asked a couple of questions to better understand kind of to a more holistic approach what integration was looking like at 6 months. So these were questions like financial literacy, interactions in banking, financial planning, employment, enrollment in certificate programs or higher education for the economic integration. For social integration, we looked at how often they were engaging with members of their diaspora, how often they were engaging with members of the community, questions around if they feel safe and comfortable in their community, how easy it is to do day-to-day tasks like grocery shopping, some of these things. And then for cultural integration, we looked at language proficiency as compared to a native English speaker. We looked at their understanding of US norms and cultures, gender roles, some of those things. And if we put on a kind of indices from 0 to 1, and most people scored, and the mean was between 0.5 and 0.6. So we see in 6 months kind of this progression towards from no integration and weak kind of engagement in the community to more deeper integration. So it's at a moderate level. So really exciting, because I don't know if I move somewhere in 6 months if I would do that well, especially just being an English speaker myself, having to learn another language. So really excited. As Neela mentioned, Welcome Core program was built on the model of the Sponsor Circle program. I don't have a lot of data on it yet. It's just been in operation for a year. We've seen over 15,000 sponsor groups apply to support more than 42,000 refugees. Now, again, this is apply, doesn't mean they've been resettled. I want to be very clear about that. And again, it puts the empowerment for the communities to come together to welcome. These are those markers again, but just to kind of highlight here, we saw the same challenges with delays in primary healthcare appointments, delays with employment authorization cards. But across the board, we again see pretty significantly high numbers in individuals at 90 days accessing kind of these sources. One thing I'm really excited about, because I double checked on this again, but the housing piece, again, this is something we hear all the time. Housing is very difficult. Here we saw 6% of individuals who, had not secured that safe permanent housing were again living in free donated temporary housing or with a family member at this point. So it really just shows the strength of sometimes the indicators don't pick up on everything, but again, we see pretty significant outcomes in the short term with this, what we define as self-sufficiency, which supports individuals and their communities for this further deeper integration that is a long-term, and as I said, not a linear process. So we at the Community Sponsorship Hub say communities across the country have and continue to be the heart of refugee resettlement. I had the opportunity to talk to Ray a little bit earlier today. The U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, pre-1980, and the establishment of this permanent program was built on community groups coming together. Since then, we've really been able to take best practices in that old way of kind of ad hoc resettlement with this apparatus that's developed that has both this refugee admissions program that is supported by the State Department, but also longer term integration programs that are supported by nonprofits in the community. It sounds like you have a really robust and rich kind of community of nonprofit service providers for immigrants here, but also the Office of Refugee Resettlement provides grants and funds too. And so what we're really excited about is the role that community sponsorship today can play in bringing communities together to support newcomers, and in that act, building stronger communities themselves and better integrating the communities we live in. We see a lot of times with the sponsors we're working with, some of them, this is their first time going to the health department or to social services. I mean, it really does broaden our worldview and understanding of our own communities through the work we're doing together. So, and I can get you the stats on this. There's not notes up here, so I can't give you the statistics, but I think I can give you ballparks of what I remember here. What we're seeing in the impact of community sponsorship today, and what we're so excited about as the Welcome Corps on campus and Welcome Corps at work scale up and kind of start to welcome individuals through Welcome Corps on campus and Welcome at work, is really the ongoing role of communities' commitment to refugees, and by extension, their ongoing commitment to their community. I mean, what I mean by that is we see a lot of times, we've got some cases and stories that you can go on our website and see, individuals get into this to support a family. And then, for instance, we saw in Montana, they started a nonprofit organization to support, immigrants more broadly in their community, right? So we really see individuals getting engaged for this, but then it really shows them other avenues of support that they can pull communities into. We also see sponsorship and repeat sponsorship, which is something that over the last couple of years, we haven't seen as much in the resettlement space. And I think, again, it's bringing people to do the work and not pay attention to the rhetoric on, in politics and by, partisans or partisan rhetoric. And then, so in the Sponsor Circle program and even in Welcome Corps, which has only been here for a year, we've seen repeat sponsorships again. We've also seen diverse sponsorships. This is something that, I think we continue that 15,000 individuals coming forward through Welcome Corps, we continue to see there. But also we saw, for instance, through the Sponsor Circle program, Vets for Vets came forward and sponsored several groups. So we're seeing, again, bringing more communities involved in the act of welcoming, which diversifies the networks of individuals involved. And that, in effect, also creates, implications and ripple effects downstream. We also see continued relationships at the end of the sponsorship period. So we saw this transition from kind of providing direct support to serving more as a neighbor or friend significantly across the board. And then one of the, I think the most important thing for us at the Community Sponsorship Hub is centering the experiences of the newcomers and then sponsors and communities. And so we saw overall across our programs today, significant kind of satisfaction with the program and their local community. I think it's about, we had 80% of individuals in the Sponsor Circle program, 10% that were extremely satisfied, 10% that were neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, and then a couple that didn't respond. And I think it was 5% that weren't satisfied with the resettlement. And then we also see newcomer engagement with members outside their diaspora and outside their community. So we saw it was, and I don't know exact statistic, but I think it's about 74% of newcomers through our surveys who were eating dinner regularly with members of their diaspora, and 76% who were eating dinner regularly with members outside their diaspora. So we really see this broadening kind of impact of community sponsorship. And I think that's all. Neil and I are really excited to be here today with you all. We really thank you for taking the time. And yeah, Ray, look forward to your presentation.
Oh, that's not it. All right, there we go. So I'm gonna get a little water first, and to just say that this will be a bookend to the first presentation, but We did not coordinate. As a matter of fact, we just met. And I will, however, later on in the Q&A, perhaps we could chat a little bit about some of the history of refugee resettlement and talk a bit about how it's changed and how, in a certain way, it's going back to its roots, you know? So the state of Texas began busing asylum seekers to Washington, D.C. in April of 2022. And by unloading the first busload of asylum seekers in front of the building that houses Fox News, Texas Governor Greg Abbott was assured of extensive press coverage for maximum political impact. Indeed, members of Congress and a few others called it a political stunt. In August, the Texas government began busing asylum seekers to New York City. And in a New York Post op-ed, Governor Abbott wrote, "Adams talked the talk about being a sanctuary city, welcoming illegal immigrants into the Big Apple with a warm hospitality. Talk is cheap, but when pressed into fulfilling such ill-considered policies, he wants to condemn anyone who is pressing him to walk the walk." Indeed, maintaining a welcoming stance quickly became very expensive for New York City because, and here's my lack of coordination, but I think it complements, because unique among major US cities, New York has a right to shelter for all homeless people, prompting Mayor Eric Adams to request financial assistance in July 2022 from the federal government when there were only 2,800 asylum seekers in city shelters. Now, see, this is complimenting, right? You know, you got the laws, I got some of the stats. So by October 7th, there were some 17,000 asylum seekers who had arrived in New York, and Mayor Adams declared a state of emergency to deal with what he called a humanitarian crisis by human hands. Now, New York City has received over 189,000 asylum seekers since spring of 2022, and almost 65,000 are in the city's care. Now, to cover the cost of sheltering these asylum seekers, in November 2023, Mayor Adams announced major budget cuts, including cuts to the police department. This and other New York City responses to the asylum seeker arrivals have political ramifications with potential consequences at the national level. So, in the balance of my time, I'll describe asylum seeking in the US, explain how the US case is becoming similar to that of European Union member states. Secondly, I'll examine New York City's response to the asylum crisis and compare it with cities having similar influxes. Finally, I'll consider some of the political ramifications of New York City's response. So, within 1 year of entering the United States, foreign nationals may apply for asylum affirmatively with US citizenship and immigration services. And that level reached 430,000 applications in fiscal year 2023. Now, USCIS asylum officers may either grant asylum or refer cases to the Executive Office for Immigration Review, where these cases become defensive asylum applications that are adjudicated by immigration courts. Now, individuals who cross the border illegally and are determined by USCIS asylum officers to have a credible fear of persecution are also given notices to appear in immigration court. Now, the number of defensive asylum cases initiated in the immigration courts have increased to 487,000 in fiscal year 2023. So if we add together the figures of the affirmative asylum applications together with the defensive asylum cases that have been initiated in the immigration court, it yields a total in 2023 that exceeded 900,000. Now, gosh, that looks like a lot, doesn't it? Man, but you know what? This is still relatively low compared to the number of asylum applications in the European Union, which exceeded 1 million last year. And then by the end of 2023, the EU also hosted an additional 4.3 million Ukrainian refugees granted temporary protected status. So it doesn't look so big anymore, does it? Right? Look, as has been the case in the European Union, the US lacks sufficient asylum adjudication capacity. And this is has been leading to rapidly growing backlogs. At the end of 2023, the USCIS had close to 1 million affirmative applications pending final decision, and the immigration courts had over 1 million pending applications with an average wait of almost 4 years. All right, so what does that mean? A couple of things, but one thing is to keep in mind that asylum applicants may get an employment authorization document after 6 months. Therefore, individuals who want to work in the US but have weak claims for asylum can take advantage of the backlogs to apply for asylum and legally work for several years until their application is adjudicated. So we have a situation now where the United States has a population of over 2 million asylum applicants. Now, since most of them have had to wait for at least 6 months, and there's also a backlog in processing the employment authorization documents, so it's just 6 months as the baseline, many needed food and shelter until they could support themselves. And this brings us to the situation in New York City. So, how does the world's wealthiest city with 340,000 millionaires, 724 centimillionaires, and 58 billionaires respond to the arrival of 17,000 asylum seekers? First, issue an emergency procurement declaration to lease hotels for asylum seeker shelters at the average cost of $383 per household per night. Second, plead for financial assistance from the federal government to pay for hotel shelters and threaten massive cuts to the city budgets if the federal government, those funds don't materialize. Third, take a page from Texas and bust the asylum seekers elsewhere. New York City signed that $432 million no-bid contract with DocGo, a medical transportation company with no refugee assistance experience, to relocate asylum seekers to less expensive hotels in suburbs and upstate New York cities, often without any advance notification to local officials. In August 2023, Mayor Adams explained that at an average cost of $383 per household per night, New York City was spending a staggering $300 million per month on sheltering 57,300 asylum seekers. Mayor Adams explained that the city spent almost $1.5 billion in fiscal year 2023, and without more state and federal support, he projected that the city would spend nearly $11 billion over the next 2 years. Now, for some perspective, New York City's projected expenditure here of $4.7 billion for this fiscal year, that approaches the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees expenditures of $5.6 billion in 2022, with 108 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. That's an average of $51.72 per displaced person per year. Less than 1/3 of the $171 New York City pays to shelter an asylum seeker each night. Now, a little more comparative perspective. Berlin and Warsaw sheltered more asylum seekers and more refugees more quickly than much larger New York City, and they did not rely on hotels. In the 8 months after August 2015, Berlin received over 90,000 asylum seekers, mostly Syrians, and housed them in the closed Temple airport and in longer-term housing built from used shipping containers. In the 4 months after Russia invaded Ukraine, Warsaw received an estimated 800,000 Ukrainian refugees. While most of them moved elsewhere, the vast majority of the 170,000 remaining in Warsaw found shelter with homeowners, receiving some government compensation. Now, Mayor Adams, he similarly suggested that homeowners, New York City homeowners, could be compensated for housing asylum seekers, but then never followed through with that idea. I mean, given the city's population decline of 468,000 from 2020 to 2022, I would think that there might be a few empty bedrooms available. Now, then we get to the issue of the costs again. And when discussing asylum seeker sheltering costs, Mayor Adams rejected Comptroller Brad Lander's proposal for raising an additional $1 billion in annual revenue from the city's top income earners. Instead, Mayor Adams announced budget cuts in November 2023, including $1 billion from the Education Department budget over 2 years, closing libraries on Sundays, and freezing police hiring. As he announced those cuts, he warned that without financial assistance from Washington, today's budget is only the beginning. Now, mind you, by February, Mayor Adams announced that the city's financial situation was not as dire as previously believed, and he rescinded some budget cuts and hiring freezes, but in a sense, the political damage was already done. You know, looking back, Texas Governor Greg Abbott's political stunt has worked phenomenally well, right? Just think about it. The asylum case has pitted Mayor Adams against President Biden, and Adams has been confronting Biden in what appears to be like this game of chicken that Adams is bound to lose. Mayor Adams wants President Biden to declare asylum seekers arriving in New York as a national emergency, implement a decompression strategy that would distribute asylum seekers evenly across the country, cut the 6-month waiting period for work authorization to 1 month, and of course, send federal funding to New York. And if President Biden doesn't do this, well, Adams threatens drastic cuts to city services, including the police department. Look, President Biden has not, and he probably will not declare a national emergency, nor distribute asylum seekers across the country, just as all presidents since Jimmy Carter have ignored similar requests. As Carter acknowledged, his 1980 federal disaster declaration during the Mariel boat lift of 125,000 Cuban asylum seekers to South Florida, and FEMA's relocation of Cubans to Arkansas cost then Governor Bill Clinton his reelection and contributed to Carter's own reelection defeat. And then, from the perspective of Biden's presidential campaign, it's better to have asylum seekers going to a safely blue state like New York, which has 2.2 registered Democrats for every Republican, that implement a decompression strategy that might divert them to presidential election battleground states in the Midwest. Now, with respect to congressional elections, in 6 New York congressional districts that Biden had won in 2020, Republicans flipped 4 seats and held on to 2 open seats that had been vacated by Republicans. Now, the Republicans, they ran on law and order, anti-crime platforms, and of course, against President Biden's open border policies. Democrats need to take back these 4 New York seats in 2024 if they have any hope, if they are to have any hope of gaining control of the House of Representatives. Now, the new House Republican members gleefully echo Mayor Adams' criticism of the Biden administration's border control measures and frequently quote Adams' statement that the asylum seeker issue will destroy New York. For example, Representative Anthony Esposito, a retired New York City police detective, summed it up in a tweet linking Adams to comments on asylum seekers, to crime in New York, and to cuts in the police force. Look, with every busload of asylum seekers arriving in New York City, House Republican electoral prospects seem to brighten. Moreover, Mayor Adams' ham-fisted, politically tone-deaf hotel contract first, talk with local officials later relocation program has essentially been a gift to Republicans running in the suburbs and upstate. In a June 2023 Siena College poll of registered Republican state voters, a majority surveyed opposed relocating some new migrants from New York City to other counties in the state. In an April 2024 Siena College poll of registered voters, 82% of respondents said that the recent influx of migrants to New York is a serious problem for the state. 55% disapprove of the job that Mayor Adams is doing to address the recent influx of migrants to New York. 58 said that they disapprove of Governor Hochul's, and 62% disapprove of the Biden administration's approach and the job that they've done. Now, after George Santos was expelled from Congress last December, Democrat Tom Suozzi flipped the vacated congressional seat, primarily because he had a new strategy on asylum immigration. Rather than trying to avoid talking about asylum, the asylum seeker crisis in New York City. He made it a focus of his campaign against Republican candidate Mazi Philip. Swazi said he supported the bipartisan Senate deal negotiated last winter on major asylum and border policy changes. As you may remember, Republicans said that Congress had to deal with the border crisis first before any aid for Ukraine could be considered. Senators James Langford and Chris Murphy forged a bipartisan agreement that would have tightened rules governing asylum applications and completely shut down the processing of asylum seekers at the southern border once illegal border crossing apprehensions reached a certain numerical thresholds. It would have been the most dramatic change in asylum and border policy in decades. But then members of Congress said, you know, we don't want to give Biden a win. And then once Donald Trump did likewise, Republicans ran from this border legislation. This included Mazi Philip, who Swazi had hammered at every opportunity about her unwillingness to support tough border control legislation, increase border security funding that was in that aid bill for Ukraine by $13 billion. Now, Swazi's strategy for dealing with Philip may become a model for Democratic congressional campaigns in New York's swing districts this fall. So, in conclusion, the US is now experiencing challenges of increasing asylum seeking that EU member states have been dealing with since the lifting of the Iron Curtain. However, the number of asylum seekers is still much lower than EU levels. And then contrary to Mayor Adams' claims, the scale of the asylum seeker arrivals to New York are not unprecedented in, in American cities, even New York City. And they're not all that great in comparison to European cities. Again, cities like Berlin and Warsaw that are much smaller, less wealthy than New York City have handled bigger asylum seeker and refugee flows much more efficiently and effectively. Now, 2 years old, New York City's asylum seeker crisis is still treated as a temporary emergency. Right? But there is nothing that Mayor Adams and Governor Hochul can do to stop the buses coming from Texas, nor to do with the generation of millions and millions more displaced people around the world coming to the United States. Housing asylum seekers in expensive New York City hotels and then busing them to less expensive hotels upstate while expecting the federal government to pay for it, I mean, that's not a realistic long-term strategy for dealing with the reality of asylum seekers continuing to come to New York for the foreseeable future. Finally, well, New York voters are not impressed with the Democratic mayor, governor, and president in their handling of the asylum situation. And this issue may become central to whether the Democrats can regain a majority in the US House of Representatives. Thanks for your attention. No. I don't know how you want this.
Before we open it up, thank you all for the presentations, very wonderful presentations.
Welcome, take the podium.
Take the mics up.
Because they're recording.
Yes. Thank you all for the very wonderful presentations. And I know we're going to be heading back very shortly. But before we go, actually, before I take questions, just because of the limited time we have, does any one of you, I have some questions here, but I would rather you ask your questions since we have very limited time. Does any one of you have questions you want to ask the? Yes, go ahead. let's just go with like one questions each first. Yes, one question each first, and then if we have more time, then I can go back.
Yeah, so to Lauren's presentation, who is making the determination whether these potential migrants are going to secondary housing? Is it like a computer unit or is it like a? You know,
That would be a great question. There is no real strategy for that. People are getting directed to the Roosevelt Hotel because there are a lot of people who are coming on buses. But people on the buses are getting routed directly to Roosevelt into the secondary shelter system. But then people who are already there, if they try to go to the DHS shelter, the DHS shelter workers will direct them to the secondary shelter system.
So
Especially true for Black migrants and migrants from Africa, particularly don't speak English, Spanish, French, Arabic.
so they don't even check for like a ID or documentation, or even if they provide it to them, they ignore it.
It's unclear. I would love to know. They're also reluctant to produce anything via FOIL.
All right. Anybody else have any questions? No questions? All right. You have another question?
Yeah, sure. I think to Neely. Yeah, I want to know. You said that the campus sponsors for Welcome Course, the circles that you showed did not necessarily include actual campuses like the administration. So it's the faculty, students, and whatnot that provide resources. But also you mentioned that campuses do provide financial resources. So I wanted to know what's the rationale from the administration, like campus administration position. If we are facing an enrollment cliff and there's budget constraints because of COVID, campuses are closing down. We had one here in Albany. Why would they want to kind of provide financial support to these refugees or?
I guess there's two questions I'm hearing. So the first one might be like a little easier. So the circles, right? So there's the group of 5. As I mentioned, it is individuals who sponsor. So again, right, it's individuals providing or ensuring provision of services. And so for the campus program, a little different than for Welcome Core, it's again the concept of a minimum of 5 people have to form a group, and that group is responsible for providing or ensuring delivery of services. For the university side of the program, we want to make sure that these individuals are connected to the campus. We don't say every group must include 1 staff, 1 faculty, 1 XYZ, but we say, these are the types of people who we see participate in sponsor groups. So, staff may very well be part of the university's administration, but you sort of participate in the program because you want to do this, right? Because you want to see this happening on your campus. And then what we've seen is in most cases, you have an individual or a group of individuals who bring this up to their leadership, right? And they're the ones advocating on campus for this program coming to their institution. I think in terms of, I would go back, I don't know if we can actually go back to the motivations of campuses, right? So we had this slide where we asked in the baseline service, what are the motivations for campuses to do this? And again, I think I may have been a little surprised seeing that what we like to see is developing that more sustainable infrastructure to serve refugee students on campus, that was one of the main motivations. I will say that over the last decade, I think I started working with displaced students about 10 years ago. And I do think that universities, a lot of times, and maybe you want to, oh, there it is. And maybe you want to fill in from the university side, working at an institution. I do think there's a variety of motivating factors for institutions. A lot of them really do see this as a way to fulfill their mission and their value statement, right? They really take it very seriously to provide education opportunity for, to build global citizens. And that is not necessarily only limited to making students in New York State global citizens, but bringing that diverse perspective to classrooms. Depending on communities, what we've also seen, it's not like as I think prevalent in this survey, if it's even there, the recruit talent to campuses and surrounding communities. So for some communities, it is really a way to bring talent to their campuses. There is a lot of communities across the United States where you do see a drop in enrollment, and institutions are really actively recruiting talent from anywhere really. Welcome Core and campus students, I will say, do go through a pretty thorough application process. So again, motivations really differ. I think the way of how funding is secured is also very different, from small institutions to bigger, of course, public to private institutions. One of the benefits that we have as a slide for many other presentations is that students who come in under Welcome Core on campus, they're considered domestic students and they're eligible for FAFSA. I would not want to be the one helping them fill out the FAFSA, but just to say, right, they do qualify for federal financial aid, they have work authorizations. So I think it makes it more digestible for institutions to also think about the financial commitment. And again, ideally, we want to see this sort of this mutual collaboration between the group, raising a lot of the in-kind donations, and then the institution pitching in with tuition, waivers, scholarships, supporting fundraising campaigns.
So,
We do have the catalyst.
okay, we want to add to it?
Oh, no, I was just going to say we've also made available so that this isn't a barrier to universities participating, the community sponsorship Catalyst funds, a campus Catalyst grant, which provides a little, it doesn't full, but helps. So it's not a barrier for campuses that want to get involved, but don't have the funding capacity.
So if you look at that one, the opportunity to build a sustainable pathway, there had been other, campuses that have on their own developed fellowship programs for refugee students. All right. This is not new in that respect, but here's a, much more, how shall I put it, institutionalized, regularized way of going about this, as opposed to bringing people in on F1 visas, which is the way it was being done.
So next question, it seems like the absence of planning is the reason for the chaotic manner in which the Asylum seeking and Asylum situation has been handled and brought us into a bad experience. What suggestions do you have for like political leaders, the governor, lawmakers to resolve the situation?
First off, again, this shouldn't be coming as a surprise. All right. We went through a whole issue in the early 1990s with large numbers of asylum seekers and found ways to make adjustments in the federal system. As far as the large numbers of Venezuelans coming to the United States, look, the Venezuelans have been leaving their country going back to 2001, actually, the elites, but then after 2010, when the Maduro regime started, and there have been millions, and there still are millions, being hosted by South American countries. And then it was the pandemic that made it very difficult for those countries to continue to host them. So, there's been a lot written about this. We knew this was an issue, but people just thought that, they're not going to happen. It's not going to happen. They're not going to come. So I think that there was a lot of foreknowledge, and I can point you to so many articles about fixing the asylum seeking system and about addressing this. And then, quite frankly, again, I'm coming down hard on the Adams administration, but they didn't reach out and talk to the people who knew anything about asylum seekers and refugees. Now, a lot of the folks who actually work in refugee resettlement in New York, they're not in New York City. They're upstate. Over 90% of the refugees are resettled in upstate New York. But there was very little communication, I don't think they really communicate very well with the state government either.
Well, I don't think that the state government is this on?
Yes.
I don't think that the state government is communicating with itself. Having had conversations with different departments in the state and informing them of who they need to talk to in their own government. But I think one of the universal factors is that nobody along that entire pathway knows what they're doing, right? Like, so everybody in the Biden administration who knew what they were doing with regards to immigration, as soon as they saw that there wasn't actually going to be any immigration change, as soon as they saw that kind of the promises that had been made were not going to materialize, and then they were going to have to start re-implementing MPP, the Migrant Protection Protocols, remain in Mexico, like they left. And so there's nobody in the Biden administration who actually understands what immigration regulation looks like, and how to effectively do it. So they have, instead of we need to create additional pathways, it is a shut down the border. The border is the problem. And we know that you can shut down the border as much as you want. People are going to die. That's what's going to happen, instead of people are going to, stop coming all of a sudden. And so you see that in the Biden administration, you see it in the state administration and the state response. And I had a quote up on a slide that was from it was a panel of everybody who's running the migrant crisis response in New York City at a New York City Council hearing. And it was just a series of commissioners of like DSS and New York City Emergency Management and Health and Hospitals. And none of them had any idea what they were doing or any familiarity with immigration whatsoever. And they said that to City Council. And so they know if they wanted to fix it, they could. I have a lot of opinions and I can keep talking about this.
Okay, so I think it's time for us to go, but does anyone have any quick question they still want to ask? Seeing none. Thank you all for coming to this presentation. We've been informed. Thank you all for attending. Thank you to all our presenters. Great job.
Yeah.
Anyway, so